I helped Lee after she quit her job, but Rebeka kept using her and living rent-free. I feel like I'm financing Lee's life. Warning, this is an extensive rant, but I needed to share my thoughts. Thank you to anyone who takes the time to read this completely. How do I approach my friend to inform her that her friend of 4 years is taking advantage of her? We will refer to my friend as Lee, 21 years old, and her friend as Rebeka, 22 years old. I recently formed a friendship with Lee and, by extension, Rebeka, since they are roommates. Because of our relatively new friendship, about a year, I feel hesitant about overstepping my boundaries. Nonetheless, Lee is quite open, and we have connected over our difficult family situations. I have learned quite a bit about her current living conditions due to her transparency. She is genuinely a sweet person, albeit somewhat naive. Here is some context. Lee decided to leave her new job after only 2 weeks without having another position secured, much like she did when we both worked together, and she quit after just 8 months last December. She began living alone in an apartment last year in August, and Rebeka moved in with her in December because her parents were abusive and stealing her money. Rebeka was not initially included on the lease, leading to complications with the landlord. Initially, the landlord was unaware of Rebeka's presence, but Lee's other roommate reported it after being difficult towards Lee since she arrived. Subsequently, the landlord attempted to charge both Lee and Rebeka the same rent for one room, $800. Everyone in the house, with the exception of one male resident, thought this was unjust and did not oppose Rebeka's stay. Consequently, their rent was proportionally divided with an additional $20 added for utilities. At this point, Lee has been unemployed for nearly 2 months and primarily stays at home. She insists she has been applying for jobs, and while I understand that the job market in our area is challenging, she seems quite unmotivated in her search. I make a point of checking in daily on her job applications and frequently send her about 5 job listings every couple of days, which she tends to look at only days later. Since she has been out of work, I assist her whenever I can. I have fewer expenses living with my parents, although I recently started repaying my student loans to make strides in reducing my debt. One of the first warning signs I noticed about Rebeka is her lack of effort in cooking. Lee handles all the meals for them, or they simply order takeout. Lee enjoys preparing their cultural dishes, although they can be quite pricey. Nevertheless, in almost 3 months of living together, Rebeka has only contributed to grocery expenses twice and often directs Lee to prepare meals. A second indication of Rebeka's behavior is that she often drives Lee's car because she cannot afford her own, but does so recklessly. I can testify to this since she almost lost control of the vehicle while navigating a 70 mph curve. Lee supposedly didn't mind, but I could sense she was upset after Rebeka caused the first accident since her insurance rates would likely rise. I encouraged Lee to establish boundaries and inform Rebeka that she should drive herself when needed, which Lee agreed to. However, I doubt those boundaries were effectively conveyed because after Lee's car was repaired, Rebeka resumed using it excessively to visit her boyfriend and go to work. Lee has missed exams or been tardy for work numerous times because Rebeka would stay over at her boyfriend's and sleep in. Following Lee's job resignation, Rebeka's use of the car increased significantly since Lee prefers to stay at home. Last semester, Rebeka only drove Lee to her 2 in-person classes, and this semester, Lee is enrolled in all online courses, freeing up even more time for Rebeka to take joyrides around the state and beyond. About a month ago, on January 3rd, Lee's car broke down again due to a lack of fluid, which caused a chain reaction that Rebeka was aware of. She accused Lee of being at fault for the breakdown, claiming she had warned her it was close to running out. At that moment, I refrained from responding, but I couldn't help but wonder how it could possibly be Lee's fault when it was Rebeka who had been driving it daily. Lee had the car repaired, and when the costs came in, I was surprised to see that Rebeka contributed nothing towards the bill and immediately started using the car again. It's worth noting that Rebeka has a job, while Lee had been unemployed for a month by then. Lee ended up having to ask her biological father, with whom she has a distant relationship, for financial assistance to cover the car bill. Fast forward 2 weeks, and Rebeka has now been removed from the lease following another confrontation with the landlord. The landlord effectively barred her from re-entering the property, but she continues to reside there since no one is reporting her and the problematic roommate moved across the country. As a result, Lee's rent has reverted to $800 plus utilities, while Rebeka lives rent-free, receiving meals prepared for her and driving a vehicle for which she contributes nothing beyond gas expenses. I have yet to voice my concerns, but now I find myself driving Lee to various places when she is without her car, or when I feel the need to coax her out of the house. I end up covering the gas costs since she lives 20 minutes away, which results in close to an hour of travel for me, compared to just 20 minutes round trip for my own errands. Although I don't mind supporting Lee for the sake of her well-being, it frustrates me to see her without access to her own vehicle. A week later, Rebeka pressured Lee into going halves on a guinea pig, even though Lee's previous pet had primarily been looked after by her older siblings, while Rebeka had taken care of her own guinea pig entirely on her own. Keep in mind, Lee is still unemployed and has very little money to spare, yet they decided to proceed with the purchase. Fortunately, Rebeka covered most of the necessary expenses. However, one afternoon, after the girls had been out for the day, they returned to find the cage improperly secured, leading the guinea pig to chew through Rebeka's chargers and cables. Rebeka became extremely upset and insisted they get rid of the pet immediately, while Lee implored Rebeka to let her keep it, even though Lee could barely afford food and bedding for it. Rebeka then absolved herself of any responsibility, prompting me to step in and assist with purchasing food, stimulating toys, and bedding. I also helped Lee with her groceries, as she expressed having essentially no food in her house at that point. While I am more than willing to do thoughtful things for Lee without expecting repayment anytime soon, she has begun to expect me to provide for her. There was an instance when I mentioned I would visit her after making a stop at Target, and she casually asked me to buy some antiseptic mouthwash without even a please. When I pointed out her tone, she went on a brief rant about her illness and sore throat. I ended up purchasing cough syrup along with the mouthwash she requested. I couldn't help but wonder why Rebeka didn't contribute, but it turned out she had been absent from the house for about 3 days, presumably spending time with her boyfriend. Additionally, when I brought her extra food, since I dislike eating in front of her without bringing something to share, she seldom remembers to express gratitude. Conversely, when she gets me something, which has occurred only twice in our 1-year friendship, she expects me to transfer her money right away. The first instance involved me testing her to see if she would indeed buy me food. She sat in the car for 10 minutes without saying a word until I asked why she wasn't retrieving the food, at which point she instructed me to send her money. This was when she was still employed. I replied that I couldn't afford it, which was true since I had just begun repaying my loans and had mismanaged my budget initially. Reluctantly, she exited the vehicle and ordered the food. The second incident occurred last week at a ticket booth for an event that only accepted cash or physical cards. I hadn't thought to bring my cards, assuming Apple Pay would suffice. I asked Lee if she could please cover my ticket, which was only $6, to which she agreed. Subsequently, while we were freezing in the stands, I ended up buying hoodies, gloves, and food because they accepted Apple Pay, amounting to over $100 in total. Later, when we returned home, she asked me to send her the $6 for the ticket because she needed bedding for the guinea pig. This request infuriated me, but I remained silent and pretended not to hear her. I returned home feeling frustrated. This girl has not repaid me for anything I have done for her, but has the audacity to request a mere $6 for a guinea pig she cannot afford, while her roommate, Rebeka, lives rent-free and guilted her into getting it. It feels ridiculous. I do not desire my friendships to be merely transactional, but in all of my prior relationships, there has always been mutual support. I've got your back, you've got mine. We assist one another and repay without needing prompting. Lee and I have discussed this notion early in our friendship, and she concurred. So I apologize for the lengthy narrative, but this is my dilemma. Setting aside the financial issues, Lee is a genuinely nice friend to have. However, it is upsetting to witness her being exploited by someone who claims to be, like a sister, to her. Rebeka tends to respond negatively when people confront her about her behavior, which I have witnessed firsthand multiple times. I do not want to sever ties with either person, but this situation cannot continue. I cannot keep subsidizing Lee's life, and I cannot ignore Lee being mistreated by Rebeka. Lee does not have a boyfriend to rely on when supplies run low or when the apartment is in disarray. Consequently, I have been gradually distancing myself, as Lee does not appear to take her job search seriously, and during my visits, she often lies in bed all day watching television. Rebeka quit her job at the end of January or early February and has already secured another position. Story 2. Nurses rebel against break restrictions, documenting missed time, and reclaiming unpaid overtime, turning the tables on management. OMG. Backstory: for the past several years, I have worked as a nurse. I spent the initial phase of my career in the emergency department at a small hospital in Canada, where we could perform basic admissions, surgeries, and critical care. However, we needed to transfer severely ill patients to larger metropolitan hospitals with more specialized services like cardiology or trauma surgery. Due to the small population we served, we operated with the minimal number of nurses necessary to keep the department functioning, which often resulted in each nurse managing an additional patient compared to other hospitals, though the average acuity level was lower, balancing out the workload. Consequently, we frequently felt overwhelmed during the latter half of the day shift and the beginning of the night shift, when patient volumes were at their peak. However, because of the reduced patient flow later in the night, we typically had adequate staffing to manage the workload comfortably. Essentially, we could safely operate with even fewer nurses, though management had not pursued that option. Additionally, our limited nursing staff meant that we did not have coverage during breaks. Thus, if your nursing partner was on a break, you would be responsible for twice the number of patients. This was manageable at night, but during the day, it sometimes led to missing our last 30-minute unpaid break due to high workloads. Another important detail is that we utilized teams consisting of 1. Emergency nurse, a nurse with additional training and a broader scope of care, and 1. Med-surg nurse, an experienced nurse waiting for a position in the further training program. Because of this arrangement, the nurses would collectively give and receive reports, meaning instead of each nurse handing over 4-5 patients, we would transfer 8-10 patients at once, resulting in reports taking twice as long. Our union had secured a contract to address wage theft, enabling us to officially document our missed 30-minute unpaid breaks at overtime rates of 1.5 times our regular pay. We missed this break approximately once during each day shift, which typically happened every other 2-day rotation, and additionally document 15 minutes of straight-time pay if the handover exceeded our 12-hour shift, which happened consistently. Naturally, management was not pleased about incurring these costs, but it was largely a non-issue since we, the nurses, were also taking advantage of time. While this may not seem ideal, on those quiet night shifts, we regularly took an extra 30 to 45 minutes to rest, which compensated for the 1.5 to 2 hours of lost pay during the day shifts and handovers. Given the low workload during these shifts, and the fact that there was only 1 emergency physician available at night, the responsibilities could be efficiently managed by 1 nurse. So patient throughput remained consistent as though 2 nurses were working. We often found ourselves idly waiting for orders from the physician. Moreover, nurses would always leave their contact numbers with their partner so that they could be reached for an early return if the situation escalated and required extra assistance. Of course, in situations involving severely ill patients, we adhered strictly to the allotted time or missed it entirely. Initially, everyone was content during the first few years I was there. Management, and by extension, the government, saved on extra pay without impacting patient throughput, and the additional sleep time during breaks greatly contributed to nurse well-being, facilitating a smoother transition from night shifts back to day shifts. However, one of our less amiable charge nurses became upset about the situation. The charge nurse role can be likened to the supervisor of the unit. In most units with admitted patients, this is typically a Monday to Friday, 8:00 a.m. to 4:00 p.m. position, with regular bedside nurses covering when the charge nurse is absent. In the emergency department, however, we had specific nurses assigned to this role on rotating shifts with a slight pay increase, and very senior emergency nurses filled in any scheduling gaps because it is a much more complex role to manage. I mention this to provide context that this particular nurse was likely extremely stressed on every shift. So, one morning while I was preparing for the anticipated rush, I received an email stating that night shifts would only be allowed the union-mandated break time. This news angered me somewhat, but in truth, they were correct. We are entitled to only 60 minutes of unpaid break time and 45 minutes of paid break time. To be fair, some nurses had indeed exploited the previous system. One nurse who acted as charge would often request over 3.5 hours of break during a night shift, regardless of the patient's conditions, which could jeopardize patient safety as it impacted the initial part of the night when we were still busy. The majority of the nurses would not comply with such requests. That said, such instances were infrequent. Most nurses did not come to the emergency department to be negligent. This email was soon shared in our group chats, ensuring that everyone was informed. Many of the younger staff members, millennials at the time, were aware of our rights and immediately began documenting all missed breaks and additional handover time, assisting the older nurses in understanding the contract. I missed my last break during that shift and stayed until a quarter past the scheduled shift change for the report, which granted me an extra $50 gross on my pay. The charge nurse on that day appeared surprised when I presented the overtime form for his signature, but I simply stated I was adhering to the rules to avoid any pay inconsistencies. On my next night shift, there was a sign-in sheet on the desk for us to record our break in and out times, with a section for our phone number, allowing them to contact us if needed, even though we were not compensated the extra $4 per hour for being on call. And contacting us back should have been paid at overtime rates per the contract. I declined to provide my number, asserting that unless there was a code blue, a medical emergency, usually signifying the absence of a pulse, I would not be returning early. Code blues were announced over the intercom, negating the need for my contact information. For the next 2 weeks, I adhered strictly to the contract. Every missed break and extended handover was recorded, and of course, I clocked my breaks precisely. I found myself staring at my phone for countless hours during night shifts, awaiting direction from the physician since I had completed all other tasks. While it may not seem substantial, that extra hour of handover pay, plus the occasional missed breaks per shift, could accumulate to approximately $2,000 extra annually for each full-time nurse, which is a considerable amount for a publicly funded healthcare system. Eventually, the manager took notice and clarified that while they were willing to sign off on any additional wages if we desired, we could also opt to get extra rest during night shifts if preferred, as long as we left our contact number. I requested that they send me that information via email. While I could have forwarded it straight to the union representative, I opted not to, as I had already regained the sleep time. I eventually left that job and have been very satisfied working at a much larger hospital for the past 2 years. Now, I have a nurse who covers both my break and my partner's. There are no teams, and they encourage us to take longer breaks whenever possible to prevent staff burnout, which had been a significant issue at that facility. I now document my missed breaks and extra sleep time to ensure everything aligns correctly. They are also willing to authorize missed breaks, which helps with staff retention. However, my conscience does not permit me to take it that far. I am just grateful for the opportunity to rest. In summary, I was instructed not to take extended sleep breaks during quiet night shifts, so we began claiming unpaid overtime from day shifts. Story 3. OMG, I asked my mom for support after a tough divorce, but she just dumps her drama on me and refuses to help when I'm struggling. I am a 30-year-old male who was married for 5 years to my former spouse, who is 25 years old. Following a number of incidents, both of us acquired charges against one another, which were ultimately dismissed. After a lengthy 2-year process, I was acquitted of 2 misdemeanors. We were both granted joint legal custody of our children, although my ex-wife retains primary physical custody. I see my children every other weekend, and the divorce was finalized subsequently. At the time my ex-wife departed, there was no custody arrangement established, and she aggressively sought a protective order against me without any evidence. I found myself responsible for her phone bill, which somehow became part of the protective order, and she took the car, leaving me without any means of transportation. To complicate matters further, I had to find employment closer to home so I could walk to work. Additionally, I had to cover the costs of a co-parenting class, domestic violence awareness class, probation, and drug screenings, $25 each visit, despite not having any drug-related charges prior to this. During this period, I began a relationship with a woman aged 22, whom I thought could be my future partner. We started dating in March of this year but ended our relationship in October. After our breakup, I had a brief encounter with someone else. When we reconciled, she became upset and, during a discussion with her mother, disclosed that we had argued several months earlier. Her mother subsequently reached out to my ex-wife, prompting a review of my visitation schedule. The court suggested that visits be supervised biweekly, but my mother, who is 50 years old, informed the court that she could only accommodate them once a month, which has been the arrangement for the past 11 months. By this point, my mother had grown increasingly intolerant of my ex-girlfriend, which is understandable. From October 2 years ago until just last week, I was subject to manipulation by my ex-girlfriend. She seemed to have realized that all she needed to do was contact my ex-wife, and the court would rule in her favor. Eventually, I managed to obtain a protective order after being acquitted. Ironically, I also discovered that my ex-girlfriend had engaged in relations with 3 of my limited acquaintances out of spite. There are still more court hearings ahead, but I will provide updates as necessary. Regarding my mother's assistance, I had to ask her for help for the first time since I turned 17. She was my sole parent until I was 17, at which point she remarried. I lacked the funds for a lawyer, so she took out a loan I would estimate around $20,000 and contributed roughly $1,500 toward my bills using her credit card. I also had no means of transportation, so my mother acquired another vehicle to facilitate the drop-off and pick-up of my children and to take me to work. She has been extraordinarily generous in this regard. However, I have been paying her $300 monthly for these expenses, which she had not initially borne until recently, when I was able to buy my own vehicle. She assisted with a $237 payment for the loan, for which I am truly grateful. She would also drive me to and from work when necessary, even though her residence is 3.5 miles away. Despite all this support, my mother has not really been present in my life beyond these visits. She never invites me over, seldom inquires about my well-being, and has only visited when my children are present. Financial help is one thing, but when I reach out to her for assistance, she often makes me feel like a burden. For instance, when she offered me a job at her workplace, I was required to test negative for everything, including marijuana. Following my separation, I enrolled in college and began therapy, where I was diagnosed with adjustment disorder and anxiety. I qualified for a medical marijuana license, which has alleviated my panic attacks. I informed my mother that it would take a few months for me to test negative again. It took 2 months previously, but I did not disclose that I began smoking again when I realized I was trapped in my current job situation because I need my insurance to cover the procedures for 3 broken abscessed teeth and a ganglion cyst removal from my hand, which will not happen until April. My mother made me feel terrible for not revealing this, even though it does not alter the timeline. At that time, I was still facing manipulation from my ex, and I chose not to confide all of this in my mother for fear of exacerbating the situation. When I finally opened up to her, she was enraged. She claimed she was enabling me and called me a liar. She then said she would withdraw her support for the supervised visits she had actively fought for. Despite the fact that I have a diagnosis from a psychologist, she insists that I have a problem, refusing to acknowledge it simply because it is not from her own psychologist. She has since declared that she will not support me in future visits. When I requested financial assistance from my mother after buying a car, she suggested I ask my uncle, who owed her $50 but was waiting for a delayed payment. While I waited for him, I faced financial hardship and called my mother to express that I was starving. She advised me to purchase ramen, even though she was aware I was $100 in the negative in my account after the car purchase. Instead of offering me dinner or assistance, she suggested I look for a food box. I reached out, stating, I'm starving and I have no cigarettes. Could you please help? I was left feeling selfish. The only times my mother engages in extended conversations with me are to complain about my stepfather, how he has gained 50 pounds, and how she no longer finds him attractive. These discussions only increase my frustration, as I have limited contact with many individuals due to the situation with my ex. To be honest, if it weren't for the mother of my oldest child providing support, I would have no one to turn to. She is in a relationship, which also adds to my feelings of inadequacy. More recently, I learned that my ex-wife and the mother of my eldest child informed my mom about my childhood sexual assault. My mother then called me to discuss it, drawing comparisons between her struggles and mine, which hurt because they had conversed about it without my presence. She communicates more frequently with my ex-wife than she does with me, particularly regarding my children. During our March court date, my mother ignored me and conversed with my ex-wife, whom she had condemned throughout our time together. I am currently working 90 hours a week and was recently invited to join Pi Theta Kappa, an honor society in college, but I cannot afford the $80 membership fee. I have also been asked to take the TEAS test, for which I cannot pay the $70 fee. My mother's response to this was, "I guess God has different plans." She has never offered assistance with either of these fees and has never expressed any encouragement or pride in my achievements. About 6 months ago, I requested her physical presence in my life, and she stated, "I can't be there. I have a family of my own to worry about," referring to my sister and stepfather. Yesterday, when I went to make a payment to my attorney, her secretary called to notify me that my appointment would be canceled. This attorney had previously quoted me $1,500 for representation, but when I contacted the office, I was told to wait for my summons before scheduling. I expressed my frustration to my mom, and she replied by saying it was my fault and then abruptly hung up. Later, she sent me information about a free clinic for my medical needs, but when I called, she informed me that she would no longer support the supervised visits because I hadn't disclosed everything to her, particularly about my situation with my ex. I feel hurt because my mother was absent during my marriage and has not provided meaningful support since. I have attempted to contribute by offering to pay for expenses for my children, but she advises me to save my money. When I express my financial struggles, she counters by reminding me that she is paying for gas and other costs. I feel trapped in a cycle of judgment, and I am uncertain how to proceed. So, am I the one at fault? Story 4. After 19 years, I caught my fiancé cheating with a younger guy the same day she told me she wanted to be fun and free. OMG. We first encountered each other when we were relatively young 19 years old female and 21 years old male. Our relationship faced numerous challenges during the initial years, as we both were still figuring out how to sustain a long-term relationship. After 2 years together, we welcomed a child into our lives, and subsequently, we had another child every 4 years. Since beginning our family, we have cohabited, seeking ways to maintain stability while striving to be the best parents possible at a young age. There were 2 significant incidents in the first decade of our relationship. The first occurred when I was discovered communicating online with another woman, which created tension between my girlfriend and me for a while. The second incident happened 5 years later when I was caught talking to yet another woman from our town. This time, her boyfriend confronted us at a laundromat, revealing my conversations with his girlfriend to my girlfriend. Ironically, this occurred on her birthday. Consequently, I spent several days at my parents' house until she took me back. In both situations, nothing physical occurred, just messages and pictures exchanged. Eventually, I realized that I wished to spend my life with her and our family, so I proposed, and she accepted. Fast forward a few years, we have been engaged for roughly 8 years. Early in our relationship, she expressed that marriage was not a priority for her, which contributed to my hesitation in making a formal commitment. Throughout our engagement, we recognized that planning a traditional wedding is quite costly, especially as a young family, and it has since been put on hold. During this period, we still faced occasional disagreements. Although we did not always separate, there were instances when I was asked to leave for a while. Reflecting on those moments, I realize I sought more security in our relationship. When I sensed her indifference, I hesitated to push the topic of marriage. I do not want to end up divorced if I commit to marriage. Now, 19 years have passed, and recently she has expressed more interest in traveling and enjoying life, while I am primarily focused on saving money for a wedding and securing a home, in addition to having funds for emergencies since we still rent. This has created tension, leading her to perceive me as dull and unexciting. In my heart, I know I am merely attempting to do what is right, but my love for her is immense. I have always found her faithful, loyal, and wonderful, even if her attitude can be challenging at times. My birthday was at the end of January, and everything seemed fine until the day after when we discussed why we are not married after all these years. I pointed out that her attitude sometimes contributes to my hesitation. This infuriated her, and she claimed that she has done everything to demonstrate her worthiness as a good partner and potential wife. She expressed disappointment at the thought that after all this time, I do not genuinely want her to be my wife, or I would have proposed by now. She cried and became emotionally distant, although we continued to communicate daily. She mentioned that changes would come this summer, and highlighted that we both gained about 60 pounds over the last 3 years, prompting her desire to get back in shape and enjoy the season independently. She encouraged me to explore social opportunities and enjoy life as well. I cherish our family dynamic, as our children adore me and rely on me while we share financial responsibilities. I believe that is also on her mind. She doesn't desire to alter our family structure because she does not want to leave her kids, and I do not either. Although she said I could stay with my parents if I wished, my love for her and our children motivates me to stay in the home we have built together. About a week and a half ago, she mentioned during her lunch break that a colleague of hers, who has a boyfriend, was approached by a man at a cannabis dispensary who made her feel flattered due to their age difference. Although he was younger than her, she found him attractive and exchanged numbers with him. They began chatting regularly with pleasant greetings and arranged to meet to smoke together, eventually agreeing to be friends with benefits. She stated that this acquaintance visited her after work on one occasion, but due to time constraints, their interaction was brief, during which he touched her intimately, and she reciprocated. She sought my girlfriend's opinion on whether she was being a tease, as the man had texted this sentiment later, though she did not think he was interested anymore due to a delay in his responses. I have started to suspect that this story was actually about my girlfriend rather than her friend. Last Friday night, she went out with her girlfriends from about 11 p.m. to 1 a.m. Then, on Monday night, she mentioned going out to smoke and catch up with a friend during his lunch break, which I learned was a male friend. I sensed something different about our relationship dynamic, but currently she appears to prefer existing as housemates, even suggesting that if we move, we should have separate rooms. For now, however, we still share a bed. Yet I haven't received a hug unless I ask, and we have not been intimate in about 2 weeks. During this span, she also stopped sharing her location with me and altered her phone password that the entire family used to know. On Monday, before she left, she stepped away to take a FaceTime call while we attended our son's sporting event. Any efforts on my part to mend our relationship or improve things have been disregarded, as she has declared her intention to focus on getting fit and enjoying her summer, socializing with whoever invites her. She expressed her dissatisfaction over feeling unwanted and unhappy. I unexpectedly obtained her phone passcode by observing her input it, and while she slept, I browsed her texts and deleted photos. I discovered a contact with exchanges that I suspect may have begun following that girl's night out when they met, and the messages continue from the following day, indicating a sexual encounter and sharing of explicit images thereafter. I was devastated to find proof of her infidelity, especially since she had always claimed she wasn't attracted to younger men and merely sought casual encounters rather than being involved with multiple partners simultaneously. She seems thrilled by this interaction, and she has commented about wanting to intimately enjoy her time with him during their encounters. I have attempted to communicate with her without revealing my discoveries, asking if she is seeing anyone else. She replied no, and when I inquired whether she would inform me if she became involved with someone, she assured me she would tell me. Now I am certain she is deceiving me, and I suspect she plans to pursue a relationship with him again today. All I can do is leave my children in her care and deal with the prospect of them needing to adapt their lives without me, or wait to see how long this new fling will last before she may reconsider wanting me back. We have been together for such an extended period, we share a deep friendship, and she professes to love me, although she is no longer in love with me. I am trying to remain in the house for the sake of my children, while hoping her affair does not endure. Recently, she mentioned wanting to find a 24-hour gym to join, potentially as a cover to meet up and engage in physical activities with him. She had a Snapchat account with his name. However, the conversations were empty, possibly indicating she deleted the exchanges. I am not particularly experienced with Snapchat, so I am uncertain how it functions or whether they have blocked me. I plan to keep monitoring their correspondence whenever possible. Now, I am faced with the dilemma of whether to remain in the house with her and my kids, waiting to see how long she continues to deceive me before revealing the truth or possibly ending the relationship altogether. Should I confront her about what I've discovered and leave the house, or wait until she meets him again and address them when they are together? Many might suggest that I should walk away since she is the cause of this situation, but it is tough to let go of someone I have loved for nearly 20 years. I am seeking guidance on how to proceed. Please refer to my page for images of the messages I extracted from her phone. Thank you for taking the time to read my situation, and I apologize for my writing skills, as expressing myself in this manner is not my strong suit. Story 5. I faced bullying from classmates and a cruel teacher until my mom exposed him, leading to his downfall. Justice was served. The narrative may include distressing content and may be quite lengthy. A summary will be provided at the end. Characters: teacher Richard, counselor Karen, myself, mother, and my friend Cedric. All names are fictitious, of course. This tale begins when I was in the 3rd grade at an elementary school, 17 years ago. As a side note, I have mild Asperger's syndrome, which went undiagnosed for 17 years, likely making me an easy target for bullying. In 2002, I moved from a dangerous neighborhood to a much safer one, at least initially. However, this began to change when I enrolled in the closest public school. Although it was heralded as the best option in the area, these ended up being the most challenging 2 years of my life. I was assigned to a male teacher, Richard, who was the brother of a friend of my mother's. This woman claimed he was well aware of my quirks and difficulties. I had to see multiple psychiatrists who couldn't figure out what was wrong with me, stating he would look after me. How mistaken we were. From the moment I entered his classroom, Richard would mock me, belittle me, and deliberately assign me tasks that I struggled to comprehend and despised, all because I refused to take notes in class, as I loathed writing. Before long, this situation escalated significantly. My classmates, except for one boy, Cedric, joined in the harassment, physically assaulting me until I would literally wet myself or tossing my belongings out of the window. Being the naive, overly kind child I was, I didn't confide in my mother or the other, more supportive teachers, knowing that it would have serious repercussions for them if my mother found out. My classmates were aware of this as well. My mother once caught them in the act of savagely beating me and ensured the kids faced consequences from their parents and received a 2-week suspension, if I recall correctly. However, one day after the 2 suspended children returned, I noticed they were conversing with Richard, shooting me hostile glares as if they were justified in their actions. I ignored it and focused on my book, as I have always been an avid reader. Had I continued to observe, I would have realized something was terribly amiss. Richard then summoned everyone except me and whispered something to them, which clearly thrilled them, apart from my one friend, who appeared horrified. I remained oblivious, a lapse that nearly cost me dearly. When the lunch period arrived, the students suddenly encircled me and began dragging me toward the nearest window, intent on throwing me out. We were on the 4th floor, and as a very slender girl, I stood no chance. Just as they were about to push me out, Cedric intervened, shoving them aside and assisting me. Understandably, I was terrified and trembling for some time. Later, the children reported to Richard that Cedric had rescued me, which led to him becoming a target of bullying as well. During all of this, neither of us noticed Richard had left the classroom. He had gone directly to the school counselor, a dreadful woman I have always called a witch, Karen, even to her face since I lacked a verbal filter. Karen then informed my mother that I had attempted suicide, causing immense distress to her. She rushed to the school and I was summoned down to explain myself. Thankfully, After I tried to relay to my mother what had transpired and was dismissed by Karen and Richard, Cedric corroborated my account, appearing furious and somewhat intimidating even at the age of 9. That incited my mother's fury. She promised to end the careers of both individuals if it was the last thing she did. However, I attempted to persuade my mother to let the matter go since, in my childlike perspective, everything seemed resolved. Yet, she did not relent. Instead, she secretly chronicled every bruise I had along with my friend's testimony regarding the bullying we faced. Then came the second year, and nothing had improved. In fact, the situation deteriorated. My classmates continued their efforts to prevent me from seeking help and sought to erase me, as one of them phrased it. Nevertheless, Cedric refused to abandon me, even at the cost of becoming a social outcast. His academic performance plummeted as a result of his loyalty to the insane little girl. I felt terrible about this, but his parents were kind and understood the situation, offering assistance, which my mother declined because she had a strategy. Next came the final assignment Richard assigned us. It was to express our feelings about our teacher, and I was eager to demonstrate that despite everything he had done and said to me, I held no animosity toward him. I obtained a large piece of cardboard and wrote in big, colorful letters, "I love you, my teacher." That is how we express it here, and brought it to school the following day. Then, chaos ensued. When Richard saw what I had written, he promptly approached Karen and demanded that my mother be summoned to school so that I could be expelled. The rationale: I was supposedly attempting to ruin his marriage by professing my love for him. At that point, I was only 10 years old and did not possess any romantic feelings for him whatsoever. When my mother arrived and discovered they were attempting to expel me, I will never forget the conversation that unfolded. "Mother, so, why are you trying to expel my daughter?" "Richard, because it's seeking obvious that she wants me and she disrupts my class all the time." "Karen, yes, she even attempted to commit mother-o, truly. I know for a fact that this was fabricated and I will not tolerate it. I already have evidence of the abuse my daughter has endured since she entered your care. I am definitely going to speak to the Ministry of Education about this matter." Neither of them took her claims seriously, thinking it was absurd until we arrived at the principal's office and learned the disturbing truth. My mother quickly contacted the Minister of Education, as she had the connections to do so back then, and recounted everything they had done to me, while asserting that she would send her evidence and request the revocation of both of their teaching licenses and positions. The expressions on their faces were priceless as they received the notification of these developments. My mother also managed to transfer me to a different class, which is quite difficult where I live. After that, I experienced a period of tranquility while remaining at the school, as none of my bullies dared to approach me. As for Cedric, I remain friends with him and communicate with him occasionally. Summary: my mother successfully ensured that the teacher who had targeted me was removed from the education system.